The million-dollar question, of course, has always been, how in the heck do they hide so well, so consistently, so immaculately, without mistakes? I mean, they make temporary mistakes, little bobbles where they're caught by a human observer, and they will immediately rectify this mistake by simply walking away. Most people think that they must teach their young, like each generation passes along the skill set, the know-how of how to avoid us. I just don't buy that teaching can be the protocol here, the answer. Because think about the very nature of instruction. It's not infallible. It presupposes a free will on the part of the students to absorb the lessons and then to decide in any given case whether or not to apply them. Given the nature of individual differences in a population, the bell curve of personality traits, it would occasionally be the case that a Sasquatch would decide simply to transgress the iron law of distance that has been imposed in his curriculum. It can't be teaching, it can't be up to free will. Therefore, it has to be a set of behaviors that are hardwired in the ancient DNA of the species. And if that's the case, then the next question is, what does this hardwiring look like? What are the contours of this behavioral landscape? And how can we put this landscape into a broader context that we can understand better, that isn't simply mind-boggling, but that fits into a template so that we can comprehend it and begin to make more progress and stop spinning our wheels as a field. It hit me one day that only two creatures on the face of the earth share this double-edged behavior profile. That on the one hand, they avoid direct contact with human beings, and on the other hand, they seek indirect contact. Those two creatures are autistic people and Sasquatch. So I started from that peculiar parallel and just kind of thought about it over time and realized that for autistic people in general, there's a need to avoid direct interaction with other people. Eye contact is extremely difficult. From reading various memoirs by autistic people, I get the sense that they feel that direct contact would jeopardize their very existence. They feel as though chaos is kind of encroaching from all around, and they need to avoid contact with it, and they need to stave it off by creating structures which include repetitive routines, obsessive pursuits of certain fields of knowledge, narrow fields, such as memorizing the entire train schedule of the UK. But autistic people don't just avoid other human beings in their circle, they subtly and obliquely interact with them, communicate with them through a variety of means. Sasquatch, too, will go to any length to avoid direct contact with human beings, but they are well known to indirectly make overtures toward us. They'll come to certain houses that they feel more comfortable with, and they will leave gifts. They will rearrange objects, and if the humans then put the objects back in the original pattern, they'll find another rearrangement. Later on, they will slap the side of a house or throw pebbles up on the roof. But when the person comes out to try to talk to this visitor or in some way more concretely interact, the Sasquatch just exits stage left. It never fails. They don't show up in the daytime at these so-called habituation sites. People sometimes catch glimpses of them in the moonlight at night, peeking out from behind trees or swaying back and forth. But there's never an experience of direct contact. So I kept ruminating on this parallel, and the more I thought about it, the more I came to recognize other parallels. Sasquatch, as I just mentioned, sway back and forth. Autistic people do the same thing, and they'll play with their hands, they'll flap their hands as a way to soothe themselves. It's called stimming. Sasquatch also do a form of stimming, and from what I can tell, by doing percussion. People hear them drumming in the woods. I think this is sometimes communication, and it's sometimes, I think, just because they enjoy doing it. In order to avoid us so scrupulously and nearly infallibly, Sasquatch must possess some sort of cognitive, intellectual gifts and visual intelligence that go far beyond what we can conceive of as average human beings. These gifts, however, do have affinities with what we call autistic savantism. Autistic savants frequently have photographic memories and a prodigious ability to process information in systems, to internalize the texture of the world in a way much more rich and nuanced than neurotypical brains can achieve. I think that Sasquatch would have to have some version of this in order to be able to accomplish what they've accomplished over the years, over the centuries, and probably over the millennia. Do I think that Sasquatch have autism in any kind of reductively clinical sense of that term? No. But I do know from research that autism is highly heritable, it runs in families, and has ancient roots. Looking back through history, we can recognize symptoms of it that were not contextualized at the time, but that speak out clearly. I think that this condition has been around for an extremely long time, and my hunch is that a shared ancestor between ourselves and Sasquatch was originally possessed of this syndrome in some form, and that since then it has come down through the human line as we see it in our autistic folks, and has come down through the Sasquatch line in the form that they exhibit it. One huge difference, of course, is that they interact with one another in a very impressive way. They're like a well-oiled machine. They're hardly ever alone. They strategically coordinate such that they remain safe and retain an advantage over any humans that are in the area by engaging in enormously adept terrain management. So unlike human autistic people, they don't isolate individually. But I think that somehow their version of this condition or constellation of traits and gifts is such that for them, other members of their species are like extensions of themselves, and that human beings are the other. Whereas for human autistic people, all other human beings are the other and threaten the individual. People sometimes ask me, well, what does Sasquatch do all day long? And I tell them they're in construction. That's like the field that they're in. We see their handiwork all over the forest in North America, and the researchers in the UK find them too, and they look strikingly similar, if not identical. People find them in Australia, in Russia, in China. Almost all corners of the world manifest these structures, and I think it makes every bit of sense. Here are these primates with large brains, huge hands, plenty of time to use both of them, and they live in the forest. So what are they going to manipulate and express their intelligence through but trees and sticks and branches and limbs and rocks? And this is the materials of their landscape. And I think they have an artistic bent and an autistic bent. And autistic people often will make structures, will line things up, will organize objects in order to bring order to their world. And as I mentioned before, to kind of create a wall between themselves and the chaos that the outside world of humans represents to them. I think Sasquatch structures often serve multiple purposes on different levels. They have a referential purpose, where a structure may indicate the nearness of water, or a good hunting area, or a trail marker, or a clan signature or a family signature or territorial markers. But I think that some also, or exclusively, are non-referential in their meaning, like abstract art. For instance, they seem to love parallel structures. They'll lean branches up against a fallen tree or a boulder, and they'll do it in an almost exactly parallel fashion. They love symmetry, and we love symmetry too. What does symmetry mean, though? It doesn't mean anything outside of itself. It means symmetry, nothing else.
All he wants to do is line things up. No more lining up. Let's color with paper, please. Let me see, make a pretty picture.
Her lining up things of my 4-year-old has gotten pretty extreme. Some classical signs of autism.
And we find it pleasing. We find it pleasing to assemble puzzles, jigsaw puzzles or Legos or jumbo jets. We enjoy that. We are primates, like they are primates, and we use our mind and we use our hands as an extension or expression of our mind. A lot of researchers seem to wish to crack some code and figure out the alphabet of these structures, as though there could be some Rosetta Stone, and if we could just obtain it, or a dictionary, we would be able to pull back the curtain and read the forest like a book. I really don't think it's likely to turn out that way. I think that the reason we find such resemblances among structures of different continents, different forests across the world, is that these are like archetypal favorites of theirs. They just are pleased by these forms. They're fun to make. They make them feel at home in the world. If you have a forest lacking Sasquatch signatures like this, and the Sasquatch in it will feel less secure, less grounded, less stable and identified with the forest. But if the Sasquatch or group of Sasquatches look around at their handiwork, and everywhere they turn they see their own most reassuring or familiar, resonant formations, they're just going to feel at home there. They're making over the forest everywhere they go, into how, in their mind, the forest ought to look, so that it's maximum Sasquatch forest. I think that if we can decide that in some form at least Sasquatch and autism have connections, then we can use this as a framework through which to better understand and even to approach communication with this species. There are people in North America who are conducting long duration experiments in communication, but it's indirect communication, it's object-based communication. There's a wonderful woman in Ohio who for years now has been leaving objects, attractive objects, little dolls, little toys, little silver bowls on her back porch, and has them very often specifically rearranged. She'll put dice out there, 3 of them right together, and with the one pointing up. And the next morning, all 3 will be together, snugly together, flush, but the 6s will be pointing up. Signs like that proliferate in her experiment and in those of many other people. And this is how Sasquatch and Homo sapiens are going to be able to be in touch with each other. It's not going to be direct. So to whatever extent one may accept what I'm calling the Sasquatch savant theory, one can still benefit, I think, from recognizing the resonance between autism and what we can infer to be Sasquatch nature and behavior. It can prevent us from having unrealistic expectations of the kind of interaction and communication that's possible between Homo sapiens and Sasquatch.